Good morning and welcome to all the attendees. We are pleased to introduce you to the first two webinars of the project, Sustainable Civil Society Dialogue for Sustainable Development, implemented by Kyoto Club as lead applicant, together with our colleagues on the Energy Environmental Association of Izmir as partner. Today we start the group 1, dedicated to sustainable cities and sustainable development, with the first module on air quality and sustainable mobility. I think it's the time to leave the stage to our panelists now. And they all work for the National Research Council of Italy in the Institute of Atmospheric Pollution Research, which cooperates with the Kyoto Club among the activities of the Sustainable Mobility Working Group. Mr. Francesco Petracchini and Mrs. Laura Tomasetti have been requested today of the Ministry of Transportation for a meeting, so they are not able to participate today. And today the webinar have a little bit change on the structure. Anyway, luckily Mrs. Valeria Rizza and Mr. Valerio Paolini will cover the parts 2. So we double thank them to their cooperation. Now I think I can leave the stage to Valerio for the first part of the webinar. Thank you very much, Valerio. I give you the screen.
So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. This first part will be dedicated to best practices on sustainable mobility. And I am Valerio Paolini from the Institute of Atmospheric Pollution Research. Just before beginning, few words about my institution. We have 4 operating units in Italy. Our mission is the knowledge and understanding of air quality and air pollution. We work on several research fields related to air quality, and the most important research fields are the urban and industrial area pollution, the emerging air contaminants, and the analysis of the emerging pollutants in the industrial emissions, the pollutant cycles at hemispheric level, and the mercury inventory, and also the development of high-performance sensors and sensing devices for air quality, the connection between climate change and air pollution, and the development of Earth observation techniques, devices, and methods, which is basically the use of data from satellites for the understanding of air quality. Finally, other research fields are related to data interoperability and environmental knowledge, and finally, the knowledge transfer to the policymakers. We have a dedicated research unit inside of the Italian Ministry of the Environment for this specific task. We are currently part of several international working groups on Earth observation. We are part of the United Nations Environmental Agency, and we are the reference point for mercury air transports and fate. We also work with several public and private companies for developing projects on air quality and sustainable mobility. And we are currently coordinating the AirPlanet program. The AirPlanet program will be the European network for observing our changing planet. And this program is divided into 4 main pillars, which are the smart cities and resilient societies, the resource efficiency and environmental management, the global changes and environmental threats, and the polar areas and natural resources. We have several projects at national, European, and international level. And among them, I will show you some selected examples related to sustainable mobility. And then I will show you other best practices that we have selected from several European cities. We have recently signed some agreements with Italian ministries, an important agreement with the Ministry of the Environment for the asbestos detection by satellite using artificial intelligence, and then the development of methods for its treatment, and an agreement with the Ministry of Infrastructure specifically on smart mobility. Just a selection of regional projects. We have a lot, but I like to show you the Selva project, which is in cooperation with the administration of Lazio region. In this project, in this Selva project, we are developing a biomass inventory and a long-term energy plan. And we are now developing a strategy based on the infrastructure and possible mobility solution for the harvesting and transportation of solid biomass for energy purposes. Another important project, regional project of our institution, which is related to sustainable mobility, is the SET project, which is ship emission treatment in harbors. And in this project, we are developing a device which is able to collect and remove the emission of pollutants from ships in the harbors. We are developing this in Trieste, which is in northeastern Italy. And now I am pleased to talk you about the Mobilitaria project. The Mobilitaria project is being carried out since 2016 by my institution in cooperation with Kyoto Club. The objective of Mobilitaria is the study of air quality and mobility in cities. The study of the connection between air quality, air pollution, and the mobility of cities is the main part of the study. We started this project Mobilitaria focusing our attention on 14 Italian cities. We selected them. They're not the largest in terms of inhabitants, but they are the metropolitan cities, which is a definition of recently applied. And so the largest cities of Italy are part of this group. There is Rome and Milan, but also there are other cities like Catania and Messina in Sicily, which are smaller, but they are all metropolitan cities. During the first part of the Mobilitaria project, we collected the historical data from 26 to 2016 each year, each monitoring station. So we collected the data on PM10, PM2.5, and nitrogen dioxide into all the stations for all the years for all these 14 cities. Here you can see graphical representation of this data. In this case, this is the last year, and you can see in yellow the nitrogen dioxide, and in blue the PM10. The PM2.5 is not represented in this figure. And you can see that we have several exceedances on the limit. You can see the red line represents the limit. So we have several cities exceeding this limit regarding NO2. We have exceedances for Naples, Milan, Turin, and Rome. And also for the case of Turin, which is a very specific geographical configuration, we have also the exceedances for the PM10. But this part related to air quality can also be discussed in the second part of this webinar by my colleague Valerio. I will focus my presentation on sustainable mobility. So another important part of this Mobilitaria project is related to the study of mobility in the cities. Recently, last year, we extended the study also to European cities, but first I ask you to look at the bottom figure again. So we are again in Italy, and we collected several data on the state of mobility in cities, in the 14 Italian cities. An important information is the motorization rate. Motorization rate is the number of cars per 1 inhabitants. So you can see numbers on the left. For example, the city with the highest motorization rate here is in Italy is Catania, and they have almost 700 inhabitants, 700 cars per inhabitants. Okay, sorry. The red line is the Italian average. The blue line is the European average. You can see that all Italian cities, I'm still talking about the bottom figure, all Italian cities are have a motorization rate higher than the European average. On the now we can pass to the European motorization rate. Here you can see on the top figure, we collected the motorization rate for Amsterdam, Berlin, Brussels, Budapest, Dublin, London, Madrid, Paris, Prague, Stockholm, and Vienna. And you can see that they have motorization rate lower than the Italian average, and we still have a relatively high motorization rate, for example, for Prague in Czech Republic. But for instance, you can see, I would like to do this comparison. You can see Paris, which is the capital of France, with the motorization rate which is almost 250, while in Rome, which is the capital of Italy, the motorization rate is the double, almost 600. What we did is also a comparison between the air quality data and the mobility data between European and Italian cities. Here you can see the exceedances of NO2 for both Italian cities on the left and for European cities on the right. Valerio will talk about the air quality again, but I would just like to point out that mobility policies are very important for the improvement of air quality, but also it is important to remark, I would like to remark also that the geographical conditions can also affect the state of air quality. For instance, in Turin, very good policies on mobility have been implemented, and despite this, due to geographical conditions and a very poor mixing of air, the air quality of Turin is still bad, despite the good mobility policies. But in general, the cities who implemented the best mobility policies are also the cities with the major improvements in air quality during this decade. The same for PM10. Here, situation is even more clear. You can see Turin and Milan with high exceedances of PM10, mainly due to the fact that these cities are inside the Po Valley, and geographical condition strongly affects the PM10 pollution, despite their very good mobility policies. Anyway, also European cities like Paris have still to deal with PM10 exceedances. For example, in the case of Paris, you can see the yearly limit, which is 35, is exceeded. In Paris, it is doubled, it is 80. So still measures are needed to tackle this problem. What we did during the Mobilitaria project is also the collection of several data on how people move inside their city. Generally, we report this information in terms of modal split. The modal split is one way to describe the mobility of a city. Basically, how it works, it's quite easy. We report the percentage of use of car, scooters, public transportation, foot, bike, and other. So you can see in light blue is the percentage of use of cars. So you can see, for example, in Cagliari or Reggio Calabria, a very high use of cars. And for example, in Milan, there is a very low use of cars. I'm sorry that the legend is in Italian, but the Mobilitaria project is an Italian project for the representation of data on mobility of Italian cities. But I will explain you the meaning of these colors. As I told you, the car is the light blue, and the orange is scooters. The cities with the with the highest use of cars are also the cities with the lowest use of public transportation. Public transportation is represented in gray. So you can see that in Milan, we have a low use of car and we have a high use of public transportation. As I told you, Cagliari and Reggio Calabria have high use of car, and indeed they have a very low use of public transportation. It means that low quality public transportation move people to use the cars more. In yellow, you can see the percentage of people moving by the feet, and in dark blue, the use of bikes. Of course, bikes are mostly used in some cities than in others. It also depends on the structure of the city itself. But you can see that in Milan, in Florence, in Bologna, bikes are have an important share, even higher than 10%. In green, finally, in green there is other ways, and you can note that the first line, Venice have a very high percentage of green other. What is other in Venice? Of course, it is the transportation through water. Venice is a city which is built inside several islands, and so almost 15% of people move using water transportation. Just a curiosity. What is the situation in European cities? You can see that the percentage of use of cars is very lower. Cars are again represented in light blue, and we have a maximum in Brussels with which is still below 50%, and we have very good examples. For example, in Paris, the use of cars is below 20%, which is a very good result. This means that public transportation is one of the preferred solution for transportation by people. And indeed, you can see public transportation in it is orange or even red, I don't know, maybe orange. In Paris, the share of public transportation is very high, and also the use of feet in green, in gray, and bikes in yellow. Bikes are mainly used in Copenhagen and in Amsterdam. This is an example on how we represent data on mobility during the Mobilitaria project. You can see, for example, this is the case of Milan and Naples. We report the number of vehicles, the distribution of the environmental class. You can see from Euro 0 to Euro 6. And also we report the number of vehicles divided by fueling, which is benzina, gasolio. GPL means gasoline, gasoil, liquefied petrol gas, methanol is methane, you can understand it, and hybrid and electric. And now in this final part of my presentation, I will show you some selected examples of European best practices on sustainable mobility. I will start with bike infrastructures, because bike infrastructures are an important investment by municipalities, but once people are able to move by bike, the general state of mobility of a city can strongly improve. Copenhagen, with this regard, is a leading city. They have 150 million euros invested in the last decade, and they have, for example, a dedicated train line for bike users, and they are developing a connection for bikes with Malmö. Malmö, I don't know if you know it, is on the other side of the Baltic Sea. From Copenhagen, on the other side of the Baltic Sea, there is another city in Sweden, which is called Malmö, and lots of people live in Copenhagen and work in Malmö, and vice versa. So the mobility between these two cities is very important. There is a bridge and there is a train, but a specific connection for bike infrastructure using bike to cross the sea and reach the Sweden has been developed, is going to be developed by the Copenhagen municipality. And I also like to point out the figure on the left, which is the parks of the Maersk Tower. if you have visited Copenhagen, you will probably remember this tower. And inside the tower, there are 950 bicycle slots. Another very good example of development of bike infrastructures is given by the city of Amsterdam. Amsterdam has been a leading city for carrying out tests on several solutions for bike transportation. You can see the figure on the upper figure. They have developed specific traffic lights for bikes, and also waiting places for bikes are ahead cars. And this is a very simple measure which can be implemented in every city, and it strongly improves the quality of bike infrastructures with a very small investment from the municipality. Next steps will include the development of new bike bridges. You know, Amsterdam, like Venice and Stockholm, is a city which is built inside several islands, so people have to move from an island to another of the city, and there are bridges, but new small bridges only for bikes are going to be developed. Boats for bikers are also being studied, and of course the administration is going to fund the construction of other parking areas for bikes. Now, among the bike infrastructures, there is the promotion of bike sharing. Bike sharing, I mean, of course, it is not the municipality that have to carry out the bike sharing, but the municipality has to promote the diffusion of bike sharing from private companies. For example, London promoted the Santander cycles. Actually, it is already being tested from Big C in Montreal, Canada. They started in 2010 with very limited infrastructure. They had 315 bikes with stations in 8 districts of London. But today they reached 8,000 bikes and 400 stalls for bicycles. Okay, bike sharing. Another important example is Paris, and this is a very good best practice that I hope will be replicated in some Italian cities. In 2 years ago, the Velib, the company for the bike sharing of the Paris city, became Velib Metropole. So the electric bike grid was extended to 60 municipalities in the metropolitan areas. This means that you can take the bike inside the city of Paris, and you can use it not only inside the city of Paris, but you can also use it to reach the small towns in the metropolitan area of Paris. And it is a very good improvement, and again, a very small investment, a very simple measure with a very high impact. Another important infrastructure to be considered for sustainable mobility is, of course, the charging stations. Charging stations for electric cars are the limiting points for the development of electric mobility. People are more intended to buy electric cars when in their city there is a very high number of charging stations. South London is a very good example, not only because of the number of charging points. Charging points of South London are a lot. They are more than 1,000, and they are going to be to double this number. But what is very good from South London is the fact that the electricity is 100% green energy. 0% electricity is made by carbon or fossil fuels. They are 100% green. Green means from photovoltaic panels, or at least from biomass burning, not from fossil fuels. So it is really zero emission mobility. Now, some best practices related to local public transportation. When you see in my slides, when you see LPT, it means local public transportation. Just a few numbers before starting. I wanted to point out what will be the European market on this, because there is a very good economical opportunity in this sector. It is still, in my opinion, it is still very underestimated, but I will give you only these numbers. Last year, no, 2 years ago, sorry, 2 years ago, they sailed 650 electric buses in Europe. And Interact analysis foresees for 2025 that 160,000 electric buses will be sold per year, which is a very important opportunity for companies. Now, currently, there are important geographical differences. For example, there are 5 countries which alone account for half of all the European electric buses. The Netherlands, UK, France, Poland, and Germany alone, they have 50% of European electric buses. Well, UK is going to leave Europe, so these statistics should be revised. I also want to point out that this C40 agreement, it is an agreement signed by 40 cities, including Paris, London, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Barcelona, Berlin, Moscow, Oslo, Rome, Rotterdam, Warsaw. You can see it. You can also check on Google the full list. And they agreed to sign this program with 2 main points. They will buy only zero-emission buses, and they will create a large zero-emission zone by 2030. So, 3 examples of zero-emission local public transportation. Copenhagen, the best example. Since last year, all new buses are already zero emissions. In Paris, there is the following program. They started since 2014, so they started very early. They stopped to buy diesel buses and buy only hybrid or CNG, which is methane, or electric buses. And they will have a completely zero-emission fleet in 2025. In the case of London, there will be all 2 floors buses will be hybrid, and then they will also, you know, in London it is typical the use of these 2-floor buses. Is in the figure on the right, you can see it. And then they will also have subsequently they will also have all 1-floor buses will become hybrid. And finally, by 2037, they will have completely zero emission fleet. So it is a very long-term problem in London, a very long-term program in London, but they have already a roadmap designed. And about Berlin, an example of zero emission private mobility, because by now we have only talked about the public transportation, but what about the private mobility? In Berlin, by June of this year, there will be 1,100 charging places. And I also want to point out that Berlin developed an energy and climate protection, and they will have no fossil car in the city of Berlin by 2050. It is again a very long-term program, but we are talking about cities like Berlin, London are different to Amsterdam or Copenhagen. There are cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen which have already started long years ago a transition to a zero emission mobility. Other cities like London or Berlin are currently still strongly dependent on fossil cars. So the program must be a long-term program. Anyway, it is still a good example because they are improving the mobility very fast. So an example of city which has already, as I told you, already a good mobility is Copenhagen. Here we are talking about private mobility again. Currently, they already are 85% zero emission, meaning that 85% of people have electric cars or electric bikes, or they move by public transportation with zero emission. By 2025, all private cars will be zero emission. So you can see the difference between Copenhagen and Berlin. In Berlin by 2050, in Copenhagen by 2025. So they will be faster. But why? The reason is that Copenhagen is already at a good point. They already are 85% zero emission. And by 2025, they will also have 100% of private non-cars vehicles by alternate fuels. So what does it mean? That it means that cars will become electric. Other vehicles, for example, trucks, they are difficult to be fueled with electric batteries because they have very long distances to be performed. So the solution in this case will be the use of alternate fuels. Alternate fuels are biomethane or biodiesel. These fuels are obtained by biomass, so they are carbon neutral. They burn fuels, so they emit CO2, but this CO2 is inside a carbon loop, which is overall a carbon neutral process. And finally, it is important to talk about the logistics. So we talked about bikes, we talked about the public transportation, and we talked about the private cars. But also there are companies which use cars, companies for logistics and distribution. And they also must be taken into account for sustainable mobility. So in Paris, there is an example of a very good best practice. It is the Utilib, they developed a fleet of 100 electric cars for companies, and they want to reach no diesel cars by the end of 2020. In Berlin, there is a very larger and more structured approach. The program is called VELMO, Business-Related Electromobility. This program, the VELMO program, is funding low-emission vehicles for small and medium enterprises. So if you are a small or medium enterprise in Berlin, you can buy a low-emission vehicle, and it will be funded. Sorry, there is an error. Okay. And they will fund, they will give you a financial support for these small emission vehicle. A final example, which is a very good example, is the city of Amsterdam again. The city of Amsterdam invested a lot on the zero emission logistics. First of all, they signed a Green Deal Zero Emission City Logistics Agreement. This agreement has been signed by more than 50 stakeholders, and the objective is that no emissions from transportation of goods will be in 2025. And also another important program still in Amsterdam is the Amsterdam Logistic City Hub. In this case, as I told you, Amsterdam, like Stockholm and Venice, is a city which is built in several islands, and they invested a lot on electric boats for the transportation of goods. So goods will be transported not anymore by cars, but by electric boats with zero emissions. So this was a final example. I will conclude my presentation with the final remarks. So there are strong connections between air quality and urban mobility. If we want to improve air quality, if we want to reduce atmospheric pollution in cities, we have to improve the policy of mobility, and the parameters to be considered are the most important parameters to be considered are the modal split, which is the percentage distribution of how people move in the city, by private cars, by bike, or by local public transportation. Another important parameter is the motorization rate, which is the number of cars per inhabitants, and also, of course, the local public transportation offer and demand, which must be improved as much as possible. Now, three other important remarks. The bike and electric bike sharing and infrastructures. They are the first examples of best practices that I show you in Europe. It is the first place where municipalities should invest in order to improve the mobility. Then after the bike infrastructure, the most important topics to be addressed in the next years will be the reducing of emissions from local public transportation. So I have shown you several examples on how municipalities can reach this goal of zero emission local public transportation. And finally, in next years, another important topic will be the reducing of emissions from private mobility and logistics. They are the final examples that I have shown you. And finally, the final goal will be to reach zero emission also from private mobility and logistics. So thank you for your attention. And we have still 10 minutes for questions. Okay.
Okay, Valerio, thanks a lot. It's Eugenio speaking now. I will leave a couple of minutes for the participants to write their questions in the question window. By the way, while they write, I would like to ask you a personal question of mine, if you don't mind.
Yes, sure.
I would like to know, it was a very interesting presentation. First of all, thanks a lot. But I would like to ask, you showed us many best practices, let's say bottom-up best practices, I mean, for municipalities who invested in sustainable mobility. I would like to ask you about the top-down, let's say, best practices. So, by the way, how does the European Union deal with sustainable mobility in the current programming period? And if you have any information about it, or if you foresee anything for the improvements for the next programming period, 2021-2027, if you like to say something.
You know that the policies are of Europe, the policies of the European Commission is going to be developed in this month. So they have recently started to show us this new Green Deal from the new European Commission, because we have to point out that the European Commission has been changed a few months ago, and the new the so-called new Green Deal of Europe has been launched, but details have still to be published about the new Green Deal. And what we see is that the European Commission will mainly invest on promoting the transition for private mobility. So there will be a lot of measures for moving citizens to electric cars, or okay, of course also public transportation. But most of investments will be for the transition of private mobility. For the public transportation, the municipalities have to work with their own strength, because the European Union will mainly, from what we see now, because details have not been published still, but there will be fundings for the transition of private mobility, but there will not be specific dedicated instruments for public transportation from European Union. Of course, municipalities can also use the European Regional Structural Fund for improving their public transportation. So in this regard, but it is the same of last years, there is the SFR. Okay.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. There is a person who's asking, can you give starting point examples for the countries which does not have enough policy? They mean, let's say, from where municipalities out of the EU should start?
Well, it depends on the specific city, because if it is a medium-sized city, bike sharing, bike infrastructures is a very good starting point. For very large cities, they cannot be the only solution. And then the other starting points are, as I told you, the use of zero emission local public transportation. They can start with a small share, a small percentage, but they can also decide to by only for new buses. They can start to buy only zero-emission buses. And another important, very good practice for developing countries is the introduction. In Europe, they already have it in every city. The creation of green zones inside of the center. Inside of the city center, they can create green zones where only low emission or zero emission cars can go. These are generally the starting points for sustainable mobility in cities.
We have another question. The person who's asking if are there any incentives from municipality to the people for using electric cars?
No, there are not incentives from municipalities to buy electric cars, but there are incentives from a European and a national level. There will be incentives from a European level, and currently there are incentives from a national level. Municipalities do not have enough financial budget for promoting promoting the buying of cars for private citizens, for the case of private citizens. In the case of companies, as I told you, there is the example of Berlin with the Velmo program, where they fund, they give financial support for companies, small and medium companies, who want to buy low emission or zero emission vehicles. It depends on the financial possibility of the municipality. Of course, municipalities are free to do this, but it is not very common.
So welcome back. It's 12:36 Turkish time. And I will leave the word to our second speaker, who is Valeria Rizza. You see her online.
Good morning to everyone. I am Valeria Rizza. I am a colleague of Valerio Paolini, and I work for the Institute of Atmospheric Pollution. Okay, let's start to see why is air pollution in Europe is still a problem. Why is air pollution in Europe still a problem? Europe's air quality is slowly improving, but fine particulate matter and ground level ozone in particular continue to cause serious impact on health. Estimates point to well above 400,000 premature deaths in Europe each year due to particulate matter, more than 70,000 due to nitrogen dioxide. 3 out of 10 of the urban population citizens are exposed to particulate matter above European Union standards, and with 9 out of 10 exposed above World Health Organization guidelines. Let's see which kind of pollutant we are talking about. Air pollutant may be categorized as primary or secondary pollutant. Primary pollutants are directly emitted to the atmosphere, whereas secondary pollutants are formed in the atmosphere from precursor pollutant through chemical reaction and microphysical processes. Primary pollutants include particulate matter, black carbon, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, which includes both nitrogen monoxide and nitrogen dioxide. Also carbon monoxide, and then we have also methane. Secondary pollutants are particulate matter formed in the atmosphere, also ozone and nitrogen dioxide, and several oxidized volatile organic compounds. Most of these pollutants can be the precursor for the secondary particulate matter, such as sulfur dioxide and also nitrogen oxides. What is the problem with this pollutant? They can cause a lot of problem on our health, and Heart disease, we can see that it is well documented that exposure to air pollution may lead to adverse health effects such as premature mortality and morbidity, mainly related to the respiratory and cardiovascular disease. There are a lot of epidemiological studies that have shown which kind of problem they can cause. Heart disease and stroke are the most common reasons for premature death attributable to air pollution, followed by lung disease and lung cancer. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has classified air pollution in general as well as particulate matter as carcinogenic. So this is important. We can see that the results of the health impact assessment related to the pollutant previously cited are shown in this table, and we can say that 41 countries listed for 112,000 premature deaths attributed to the PM2.5 exposure. 71,000 can be attributed to the nitrogen dioxide exposure, and 14,100 to ozone exposure. This is in all 41 countries. For the 28 European Union, we can see that the premature death attributed to PM2.5 can be, they are 374,000. Instead, for the dioxide, nitrogen dioxide are 68,000, and the premature death attributable to the ozone exposure are 14,000. So that's why it is too important. In this graph, these figures gives an overview of each sector's contribution to total emission for all the pollutant that I have cited before. The road transport sector was the most significant contribution to the total dioxide nitrogen emission, and the second large contributor to black carbon monoxide, the primary PM2.5. We can see in this figure that the emission for all primary and precursor pollutant contribution to contribute to the ambient air concentration decreased between 2000 and 2017 in the 28 European contribution. In this table, in this figure, we can see that the most contribution to the total emission, for example, for the PM2.5 is the road transport, and also for the black carbon, and the carbon monoxide. This is the second contribution sector. Let's see what's happened in Europe and what is the policies that we have adopted. The European clean air policy is based on ambient air quality directives that they set for protection human health and for the environment. This directive will require member states to assess air quality in all their territories and to adopt and implement air quality plans to improve air quality where standards are not met and to maintain it where the air quality is good. We can refer to the directives of the 2004 and 2008, and they regulate the pollutants such as PM10, PM2.5, and also the toxic metals. Another policy is to establish in the National Emission Sharing Directive, which requires member states to develop national air pollution control programs to comply with the emission reduction commitments. So this is the principal policy that the European Union adopted. In this table, reported the standard for the protection of health for the pollutant that I have cited previously. Let's see that for the PM10, so the particle matter that have a diameter less than 10 micrometer, we have a limit value for the daily limit value is 15 microgram per cubic meter. For the annual limit is 40 microgram cubic meter. Instead, for the PM 2.5, we have a limit, an annual limit of 25 microgram cubic meter. Let's see the nitron oxide that is our limit, and we can see that this limit is 200 microgram per cubic meter. Instead, the annual limit is 40 microgram per cubic meter. So in this table I reported all limit for all pollutants that I have shown before, and also for the toxic metal like lead, arsenium, cadmium, and nickel. In this table, I have reported the World Health Organization air quality guidelines, and you can see that for the PM10, there is a daily limit of 50 microgram per cubic meter. Instead, for the annual limit is 20, is more restricted than the one that I have shown you that are proposed to the ambient air quality directives. And also for the PM 2.5, we can see that daily is 25, and for the annual limit is 10 microgram per cubic meter. So where is air pollution a problem? You can see that there are a dot point, and the dot point means that we have the value is above the limit that the directive proposes. So we have a concentration of PM10 greater than 50 microgram per cubic meter, and the concentration of PM10 and all the other pollutants are measured by the stations that are put inside the countries, and they can be urban, rural, and suburban and rural. And the EIA, so the environmental agency, collect all the data and made this kind of maps to see where is the problem. And at least one station is with the values above PM10 annual limit value. I remind you that the annual PM10 limit value is 14 microgram per cubic meter. Instead, here there are PM10 concentration in relation to the annual limit value in 2017, and also you can see a dot line in red that are the guideline proposed to the World Health Organization, and the stricter value of the the stricter value of the World Health Organization is 20 microgram per cubic meter, and we have 51% of the strict value of the World Health Organization mean was exceeded at 41% of the station. This is the situation for PM10. Instead, for the PM 2.5, we have that 7 stations of the member states are above the annual limit proposed to the air quality directives. And we can see also here the difference between the two limits, and more of these of the countries are above the guidelines proposed to the World Health Organization, respect to the limits proposed to the air quality directives. And also in this case, for the PM 2.5, we have 79% of stations that are above the limit proposed. The same thing, let's see for the nitrogen dioxide. We can see there are more red dot, and it means that there is still a problem, and 17 European member states are above these limits. And in that case, the 10% of stations are above these guidelines. So let's see what is the percentage of the urban population in the European Union exposed to air pollutant concentration. We can see that for the pollutant, for the PM10, in which the limit value was the annual limit, the daily limit value is 15, we have an urban population exposure of 19%. Instead, if we see the guidelines proposed to the WHO, we have a population exposure estimate between 42 and 52. So we have more population exposed because we have a limit more restricted. The same things we can see for the PM 2.5. We have an urban population exposure between 6 and 8. And also for the instead for the WHO, we have an exposure estimate between 74 and 81%. So let's see what we can do to do the best. Almost 8% of the energy used in the European Union household is for heating and hot water. And also emissions from residential heating are going down. They are still a major source of air pollution. For example, to reduce the PM10, we can implementing cleaner industrial processes, boosting energy efficiency by refurbishing buildings. We can for the city we can using heat from existing industry or renewable energy sources. We can promote substitution of old and dirty stoves and boilers with clean models. And also the problem is the urban transport. So we can implement public transport such as electric buses and trams and the new Euro 6. Another mode to reduce, for example, the pollution due to the nitrogen dioxide is to, for example, implementing always clean industrial processes, and also to put traffic restrictions such as low emission zone, reduced speed limits and congestion charges, also to improve bike sharing, say Valerio said in the previous presentation, and also use cleaner transport such as cars or buses, for example, and electric buses and trams. So more action is needed to encourage the switch to cleaner fuels and more efficient heating. Also, this is a benefit for the climate, but also for our health. For example, with this kind of best practice, we can reduce heart diseases. So also we can, with cleaner transport, reduce cars exhaust fumes, which irritate the eyes, nose, and throat, and can cause lung cancer. Less ozone pollution is better for our lungs and heart. Renewable energy and city or district heating significantly reduce local air pollution. So that's it.
Do you have any more slides, or
Sorry.
we can start with the questions and answers?
We can start with the questions. Thanks.
Okay.
If there is
So while the participants, of course, you can write your questions in the question window like we did for the previous speech, and while they will leave a few minutes, like for the participants to write, I would like to ask you about some, this air pollution right now in Italy is very popular on newspapers because we had a few weeks without rain in most of the Italian territory, and there are a lot of lot of questions about which is the most important source of air pollution. Let's say there are some people who talk about the mobility, the urban mobility. Some others who talk about like you already showed, the stoves, the heating systems, the old heating systems, biomass. What do you think? I mean, because probably the heating systems are old and they need to be renewed. So with new heating systems, we will have a significant improvement, or not? I mean, what do you think about the most important sources of pollution?
Okay, I show you that in this table, in these figures, I have shown you the main contributors that are. The first of all is, yes, of course, the urban transport, but is the fuel that we use, and also the heating is the problem. So the best way is to remove the old stoves, and we can substitute them with others. So the problem is the urban transport, of course, so a urban road, but also the heating. So the best way is just to replace the old one with the new one. I can so you can see in the figures that for for the nitrogen oxide, the main contributor is the road transport, and the percentage is 39%. You can see.
Thanks a lot. I don't see any more questions about that, so I will again tell the participants that if they have any questions after this webinar, they can write to our emails, and we will send the questions to the speakers and give you the answers straight away. We both presentations shown today will be available on the project webpage, and we remind you that next Thursday, the 23rd of January, we will continue with the other two webinars about waste management and water quality. So you can re-register from our website on the webpage of the project, and so we hope to have you again here on Thursday for the other two webinars. Thanks a lot to everybody. Thank you, Valeria, for your speech. Very interesting, and I will close the webinar now. So we have finished, and wish everybody in Turkey a very nice day.
Thank you a lot. Thanks, goodbye.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Todd.